assessments than what we have now.
Yes.
We have a question back here.
Good evening.
Good evening.
I'm Dr. Abiade, candidate for mayor, and I'm very invested in education. These are my presence here. Just one thing, I have a question for you. I've taught graduate and undergraduate students, and I'm amazed how students are not taught to think. The teaching towards passing tests is part of our culture. And so I'd like for you to talk a little bit more about your position on the curriculum process that teaches students to think. If I'm not putting you on the spot, I appreciate
No, that's fine.
I didn't ask my question, Well, go ahead, I'll wait.
Well, is your question about how you integrate process and teaching thinking?
I want to know your position, then I have a question.
Oh, all right. So I had, before I got on my school board, which is one of the reasons I got on our school board, was I was involved in some changes our district wanted to do to the science curriculum. And so in science, there's a lot of this argument about thinking versus knowing. And I had a Hillsdale professor, I talked to her about it once, and she said, you cannot have a conversation about acid rain unless you understand pH and what the difference between acid and a base is, and its impact on living organisms. So the process of thinking is articulated by what you know, and then how you can compare what you know. But first, you have to fill children's minds with relevant knowledge, not biased knowledge, real knowledge, like multiplication values. Because let's take math thinking as an example. I correlate it to sports. If you play baseball, you know that you cannot be an effective baseball player if you don't have the muscle memory of catching and throwing. Those are the basic skills of baseball. You have to learn, you have to practice them, they have to be intrinsic. They say move it to this part of your brain, automatic. Multiplication facts are much the same. Children must know them, they must be back here so that they are readily coming out, because when you're thinking about an algebra problem, you can't be worried about remembering how to multiply. So that's to me, is the foundational basis for education. When children are young, you help them understand truth, facts, build them with knowledge. Then you pull from them, as they get into high school and college, the process of comparing and contrasting what they know, and start thinking bigger.
Thank you. Well said. My second question, you mentioned that the two main factors in education are the parent-student relationship, empowerment, and your second one is excellent teaching. I had an opportunity to work as a school counselor in an elementary school, and someone brought up about the disparity between good and bad education in terms of student level. One of the things that I have found consistent in all learning is this parent-student relationship in bad and good schools. And when you have school of choice, that relationship is often manifested in parents going to schools with good teachers because they already have that relationship. Here's the dilemma for me. I'd like to hear your input. There are a large population of single mothers, or people who didn't finish high school or finished high school and do not have that education or that value. How do you propose we address that? Because I find that more of an issue even than excellent teaching. You have excellent teacher, the student doesn't study, the parent doesn't have a value. The teachers, no matter how excellent she or he is, the learning is still minimized. So I found that even as a therapist, I've not known how to approach them. So I would be interested in hearing this.
First, I will agree with you in the priority that engaged parents does supersede excellent teachers. Because if an engaged parent discovers the student does not have an excellent teacher, they can find alternatives, right? So that, I would agree with you on that priority. I also like to point out to people, if you read education research very much, there is one variable that is controlled consistently in a good educational research for student achievement, and that's mother's education level. That the mother's educational level is the most predictive factor of a student's achievement level. Now that does not mean that children whose mothers didn't graduate from high school are doomed to not being able to learn. But it is harder for those moms. Now, it was mentioned I'm on the Great Start Collaborative Board in Kalamazoo. I meet a lot of single moms, moms who come from low socioeconomic areas. And one of the things we do is try to teach them how to advocate for their children. And so we're sitting there at dinner, and this mom next to me, she says, okay, I gotta ask you something. So, okay. She said, first I gotta tell you, I can't read. She's whispering, I can't read. But I want my kids to be able to read. So obviously, I can't teach them to read. And when they send home papers, I don't know what they say. So here's a mom. She is there in the evening. She's engaged. She wants to learn how to do this better. She needs our support. She needs resources to help her succeed. Here's another story to tell you. Dearborn Heights. These parents are suing their school district and the State Board of Education for breach of contract because their students graduated, got their diploma, and cannot read at the 8th grade level. Now, I've seen on the internet people respond and they say, where were the parents? And I remember this mom who said to me, I can't read. How could I know? When I was on Portage School Board, we had a mom come to the school, to the board meeting, and she said, I have 2 sons. My older son is 11th grade. He has failed math every year since 6th grade. And they tell me, don't worry. She says, I can't teach him high school math. My second son is in 7th grade. He has failed 2 years in a row math. This is unacceptable. And you know what the answer was to the school board? This is not a board level issue. And we were told that we were not to be talking about it. It wasn't our problem. And to me, when you had a mom that was that brave to come forward to the school board, she wasn't the only one. That wasn't the only problem. Now, the House Education Committee had a presentation from some people in Florida on some of the ideas about what they've done to achieve the level of student achievement that they have. And it's the same thing that they're trying in Kalamazoo schools right now, and that is no social promotions at key points. So, for example, the end of 3rd grade might be a no social promotion. And unless a child can read, they don't get to go to 4th grade. Now, we haven't been doing that because we worry about the, feelings of the student. But the point is, you don't want to retain kids, but everybody, the teacher and the parents and the student all know this is a brick wall. If you can't hurdle this brick wall, you're not going on. So we all do what we can to make sure that by the time the child gets there, they're ready to go over that wall. Okay? That requires a different level of commitment by the schools and by the parents. So I would agree with you. I think we have to do all we can on parent engagement, but if you look at the conversations that are happening around Common Core, the education community does not want the parents engaged the way we need to be engaged. And so you have a system that will never succeed the way we need it to until we break through that barrier and get those educators to understand and embrace the relationship that they should have with parents. Does that answer your question?
Excellent.
Another good example of a parent-child relationship was Dr. Ben Carson, who his mother was not, I don't think she had a 3rd grade education, and he was a neurosurgeon that was very successful.
I think he said that he and his brother didn't know she could read till they were in college.
It's a great movie. Gifted Hands is a great movie.
I have a question. My question has to do with I guess the reason why I came to the meeting is because I'm trying to figure out exactly what is the difference between what makes Common Core so much worse than what was in place before, which is No Child Left Behind. Other than the percentages being higher on what the schools and the teachers have to meet, for the entire process of No Child Left Behind, it has been a situation where teachers have been teaching to the test. So I'm just a little concerned or a little confused in trying to figure out what exactly the difference is. Why should I be concerned about Common Core versus what was going on and what had happened as far as No Child Left Behind? The other question I had also has to do with Massachusetts. And I looked this up a while back when we were having issues with our school district. And one of the things that they do is that it is a constitutional right to have public education there. And they also follow that with money, with funding of their schools and of their teachers and of their programs, different than what we do. So I know you mentioned that, and I was wondering if you want to use them as a template. That also means that comes with funding and backing and money as well.
Okay, so two things, right? One is the money, and the other is comparing No Child Left Behind and Common Core. First of all, No Child Left Behind was 50 experiments, all right? Every state had the freedom to establish their own standards and their own assessment. So by making it state-controlled experiments, then you had more influence. Parents had more influence, the community had more influence. So that's one of the important differences. This is one grand experiment for the entire country that was not built on the best practices that we learned from 10 years of 50 experiments. So the risk of the experiment is one huge concern. That we have as a state will have much less control is the second issue. And in terms of the content, the Common Core standards are not better than Michigan's were. And they're not better than Massachusetts were or Indiana were. So those are the two issues, the quality of the standards and who controls the standard and the assessment to give it away. So that's why I would say that it's a huge difference. I was an advocate of No Child Left Behind in many ways, but we didn't do it, again, we didn't do it right. Those states that did not make sure that kids could read by the end of 3rd grade and knew their multiplication facts in 4th grade, it still is unfair to hold teachers accountable to teaching them algebra and in high school and Shakespeare. I mean, that is unfair for the teachers, an unrealistic expectation for the students and the teachers. And to have Algebra 2 as a high school graduation requirement for kids who haven't even learned their multiplication facts is ridiculous. We have to be accountable through the whole system to make sure we move kids along so that will work. Okay, money. In fact, in research, I didn't bring all those charts, but funding does not positively impact student achievement. There is no evidence. You can look nationally and internationally. There are places that spend a lot less money than, for example, Massachusetts, and have better outcomes. And there are places that spend a lot more money and have worse outcomes. For those of you who are math, which is one of my favorite charts, there's a correlation chart. And a correlation chart, when you put the data points on there, you get, like, for example, a state and what their student achievement is matched to the money they spend. If there's a correlation between them, a line will develop. Low investment, low achievement, high invested, high achievement. It's not. It looks like a scatter diagram. And it's for years. There's years of evidence. Yes, you need a certain amount of funding. But I actually fear that one of the reasons we have so much trouble in education is there is way too much money in the system. Not way too much money being paid to teachers. Way too much money being paid to textbook companies, to university professors who come up with new ideas, to consultants. If you look in Michigan, the teacher-pupil ratio in Michigan is at an all-time low. And student achievement is still not better. I asked one of my principals, I said, okay, I looked at your numbers. If every certified teacher in your building was teaching a class, you would have 16 students per class. But you have 25. Why? Well, we have a media specialist, we have a PE teacher. I mean, you go through the counselor, you have to go through this whole list. And I said, have you ever asked your teachers, if you only had 16 kids, would you need a media specialist? Would you need a counselor? I mean, as a teacher, if all you had was 16 kids, you could get to know those kids, you could get to know their parents. You would have such a smaller group. You could do PE, it would just be so much easier to manage. And he said, well, no, I never thought of that. And I said, well, why not? There's nobody telling you you can't do that. You got the staff. So we're not generating the creativity about how to use the money that's in the schools. So I really fear that money is part of the reason we have all these people intruding into what really matters between parents and teachers and kids. And I would advocate that some of the best models show that countries that pay their teachers really well right out of school, and then they don't get huge increases over time, because most people don't go into teaching for the money. But you give them good money right from the start, that you will have better outcomes in the long run. So there are models about spending money that are better than the ones we use.
Okay, another question here.
I am so frustrated, I don't even know where to start. My husband and I are retired elementary school teachers. And before I retired, Workshop Way, Math Their Way was the biggie. I don't know what the process is now, but it was so frustrating to me because I retired. I taught all the elementary grades, but I retired in kindergarten, and I watched Workshop Way starting in first grade, and the kids were very busy while the teacher was teaching reading groups, going from one workshop station to the next. And at the end of the day, I watched those teachers deep six the work. And I think it's only been exacerbated over the years because Bill and I are really frustrated trying to help our grandchildren. The textbooks are teaching some strange method of math, and you hit it right on the head. You frustrate and confuse a child when you try to teach them a traditional, known way when they come home without a textbook, and it's something that, I mean, I got my master's in early education. You don't know how to help them. And I think it's talk about conspiracy theory, there's something going on that they do not want parents to be able to help their children at home. And I talk to our daughter-in-law about it, and she'll say, well, you can just get online and check it out or whatever. But it doesn't happen, and it's not explained. And what really put the nail in the coffin for me was I was trying to help our, I think he was in 3rd or 4th grade, grandson. And I mean, there was no excellence in his work. Nobody ever sees the work. They correct their own work, or maybe they swap papers or whatever. But I looked at his work that he had brought home that day, and it was wrong answer, wrong answer, wrong answer, wrong answer. And I'm like, babe, you don't have anything correct on this paper, and look at this penmanship. I couldn't even read his numerals. I said, if you were in Mimi or Papa's class, you'd have to erase this whole thing and start over. Do it right from the beginning. I was just trying to, He said, Mimi, this doesn't matter. Nobody's going to see this paper. I just have to get it checked off that I got it done. But because so busy and can't be involved, they get away with it year after year after year after year. And I don't know what's going to happen if Common Core is also implemented, because if you try to teach a child 4 ways to do multiplication, he's going to give up. He has his way, and if he can't learn this way, then you can teach him that way, but you can't teach him, oh, you can do it this way or that way or this way or that way, because they don't understand that it's all related to multiplication. They're not able to think of these. And also, I just want everybody to know, and maybe you, I haven't even answered your question. But we were out quadding the other day up in Upper Michigan, and we found a stranded teenager on the road who was 20 miles from anywhere, and his friends that he'd been doing medicinal mushrooms up the mountain with had left him abandoned at almost dark with no clothes and bears and everything else out there in the wild. So Bill drove him the 20 miles to his home, and we found out that he was a high school dropout. So the next day I called to find out what would we have to do to get this young man his GED. Well, the man who's in charge of it in Gaylord, Michigan said, if you know anybody who's looking for a GED, you had better get it between now and December 20th. Because this young man did his pre-test for the GED and never went back. And he passed all the sections great. He just couldn't do math. And I think that he was so, what's the word I'm looking for? He was so put off by the exam. He thought, he felt such failure that he never went back to find out that he passed everything, could have brushed up on his writing. He was a great reader, he just was failing in math, so he never went back to take the test. And this man who's in charge of the GED said, from now until December 20th, which is the last day to take the test, there will be 4 algebra questions on the GED test. But on January 1st, 27 actually, out of 50 questions are algebra. And this young man can't, I mean, he might be able to pass it if we could get him to take it between now and then. Who's causing these standards? I couldn't pass 27 out of 50 algebra questions.
Right, and so he's magically supposed to know that now.
So he's magically not going to ever get his GED. It's like it's...
So I just want to ask you a favor. Any other retired teachers, I think breaking through the communication between parents and educators resides with you. You hold a special opportunity for us because the education community is kind of a closed group. It's hard for me to get to speak with educators because they don't view me as a tutor and having a math degree as a qualified educator. And so, you know, qualifications in the education community count for a lot. So if you've been a teacher, I think you can open the conversation with other teachers. And I think if we can get more teachers on our side to say, you know what, I want to do a good job, but this is silly. This is not going to get us where we need to be. And trying to help teachers feel less, I better not speak up because I'll get in trouble, and more, I'm a professional. You want my opinion. You want me to be involved. I'm quite worried that in Michigan, where we encouraged early retirement for teachers, was also intentional to get the teachers who knew better out of the way, and a lot of these young people who are coming through now don't have the same expertise in really understanding what works. So I would encourage you to talk to other teachers, to go to your schools and talk to your grandkids' teachers, try to build that rapport to help get our teachers out of there so that we can build that relationship back where it needs to be.
Well, it's like it's been so many years, and the supervising teachers have already been taught some bizarre method of teaching. So now it's like the next group, they're probably, because I've been retired for a long time, but it's it's so scary. It's like, and I am probably a conspiracist because I think that they're trying to bring our country down to a level that we can't excel anymore. It's just,
Okay, so one of the things I didn't talk about very much was the shift from fiction to nonfiction reading in English language arts, and it's clearly articulated that we're moving down to like 50% nonfiction over literature. So the first point is, when students aren't in school during the day, they're taking social studies and science and math and English. You would hope that in social studies, science, and math, they're getting nonfiction reading. You could argue some of it, especially in science, but you know, that's where they should be getting it. So they only get 1 hour of literature a day anyway. How many of you have taken the Hillsdale Constitution 101 course? It's excellent. I would strongly encourage it. One of the correlations I made, which I didn't realize before, is our Constitution was written based on the nature of man. And if you read great literature over time, you understand that the nature of man never changes. From the Bible, to Shakespeare, to Grapes of Wrath, to Harry Potter, the truth about people, that we love, we hate, we're greedy, we're lazy, we work hard, and we have all these things that are natural about us. And our founding fathers wrote our Constitution to balance so that our country would benefit from the best of us and be protected from our worst traits. And when children read great literature, these things kind of go into their brain, not extrinsically, but intrinsically, right? So they understand. The Constitution is a real document written as intended to be used as written forever. When children do not learn this about the nature of man never changing over time, they are susceptible to the argument that the Constitution is a living document that should change because, geez, we didn't have computers back when they wrote the Constitution. It was a new time. They are susceptible to that argument. And I had never really understood that or thought about it until I did those Hillsdale Constitution classes. And it's such an important foundation for our children that if we don't protect it, we will lose it.
Another question here?
It's not a question. I have a couple of observations, though, if I may, both as a survivor of the Massachusetts system and a former science teacher. The candidate's question really is two questions, because at this point we're focusing on the attention that we're paying to the teachers in school, and I've heard no one address what I consider a real problem, is who is looking at the colleges that are teaching our teachers, and how are our teachers being molded and the ideas that they come out with. That's a whole separate problem and can't be addressed initially by the immediate community. However, the relationship between parents and teachers is also just as important and can be addressed by the community. And I make one just very, very, very brief suggestion, and you might consider this as parents. Read as much John Taylor Gatto as you can, or get a hold of, as a family, the underground history of American education, and split it up into chapters and groups, and have one group read this, get together and discuss it, and find out for yourself what's wrong, and then go back and talk to teachers. Now, I haven't taught in public schools for some time. I had the benefit of teaching in public, in Christian, and in homeschool groups, all three. And there's much to be said for all three. And students have their own learning style, so they'll best be served by one of those three. But we need to equip the teachers pro-student to begin with. The other thing that was brought up, and I have a little disagreement with you on this, but you also brought this up, is the question of our students being taught what to think. This is my way of saying the same thing, not how to think. And in fact, I would disagree, if I may, with you, that we can start teaching our students what to think by teaching them how to ask what, why, where. In early ages, the level of the questioning, the amount of time given to it can be controlled so they're not being asked to do something that they're not mentally prepared for. However, if they're not taught to ask a question, critical thinking skills will never be developed. As a science teacher, this is what I'm missing the most, including in many parents that I talk to now who are trying to homeschool their children. They are lacking the basic critical thinking skills. And these need to be brought to our students, and they can at a young age. So you've got two problems. You've got who's teaching the teachers, and how do we get involved there, and maybe see some changes made there, and then the parents getting together and becoming a positive force as advocates for the children.
I will accept your improvement to the point about teaching kids thinking. We should always encourage our children to ask questions. So when they're 2 years old, was their favorite question is why? So, I mean, you're encouraging them to use questions to learn more. And like, for example, as a math tutor, people have asked me, why do we have to learn Algebra 2? I mean, what's the point of learning about the square root of -1 is an imaginary number? And I say, a child who has learned square root and they've learned positive and negative numbers, they ought to wonder it. So that's how you can tell as a tutor, that's how I tell. It's the questions the kids ask that I haven't taught them yet. That they are, you can tell you've led them along the line, it's the next logical thinking. Okay, so I stand corrected that there, I think that's a very appropriate addition. The who's teaching our teachers is absolutely critical. I did not bring it up here. I think it is key in getting the excellent teachers. You may know, Hillsdale College actually closed their School of Education because the state of Michigan classified them as a below average school for teaching school of education. And the reason was they didn't offer the, the words I use, propaganda classes that appear in so many of the schools of education around the state. So now, Hillsdale College says, you want to be a teacher? Come, we will teach you how to be a teacher, and we'll get you that stupid certification stuff that the state requires someplace else. We'll partner with somebody else to get it for you. But we will teach people how to be really good teachers. So I absolutely agree with you. I mean, I feel bad for teachers because it is difficult to do a job you are not well prepared for. And so many elementary school teachers are not well prepared to teach math. Reading is the primary emphasis of elementary school. The schools of ed spend a lot of time on reading. They do a severe disservice, and children who do not have a strong foundation in elementary math will struggle, and they will think they're not good at math and they can't learn Algebra 2, and it's just not true. It is reasonable for any child who's going to earn their driver's license, if they have been given the proper foundation, to be able to master Algebra 2. So I agree with you, that's absolutely a concern. And to mention also, when I said Massachusetts system of education, Sandra Stotsky will put that right on the list. They articulated a whole set of things that they put together, of which standards and the assessment were just a minor piece.
I have a question.
Hi. I took my daughter out of school in the 4th grade because she couldn't read, and they were just going to keep passing her. And we homeschool now. I would like to know what is going to happen with Common Core and homeschooling.
All right, so right now, we're pretty sure that homeschoolers, up until you graduate, are safe. There is some conversation that the Senate is looking at enhancing the resolution to protect homeschoolers, but most of us believe that if they put anything in there, we run the risk that it will be written in such a way that there's something not in there that we'll miss, that'll just mess up, because truly Michigan has one of the best homeschool protections as it is. So right now in Michigan, the only impact is to certify your diploma, you have to take the 11th grade test, right? But there are a lot of schools that I think the best schools that will look the other way, that will trust, but that homeschool quality and not require that certification and will take you based on, if you take an SAT or an ACT, so forth. So if the worst comes to fruition and Common Core passes and our public schools insist that they will not try to do anything different. And I believe that the best alternative for parents in the state of Michigan will be to homeschool, and that we really would need to establish a community effort. There are a lot more networks for homeschoolers now than there used to be, but for those of you who want to protect your children's education, I just, if we lose this battle, I fear that there's not going to be another viable choice.
We have very little time left. We have another question over here and a couple in the back.
But it's a good thing the other guy didn't show up. I wouldn't give him much mic time.
Hi, I'm Natasha Petty. I've worked with children with disabilities for several years. I have a degree in early childhood disability, early childhood. My question is, how does that affect children with disabilities in the school system? And my other question is, how does that affect religion in the schools? Because I heard that there is, where they're going to implement some type of religion in the schools. And my question is, I somewhat disagree with that. If they're not going to implement Christianity in the schools, how are they going to implement the Quran and other things in our schools?
So students with disabilities, there has not been, they haven't even developed the assessment for mainstream students. Accommodations for students with disabilities is way behind. They haven't put anything in place. And if you have to type on the computer to be able to take the exam, students with disabilities are at a severe disadvantage. It's true. If you're early childhood, you might be interested, there was a letter signed by over 500 early childhood educators, psychologists, pediatricians, that the K-5 Common Core standards are developmentally inappropriate. And there's a very good YouTube video by K-O-S-H-N-I-C-K and Common Core. You put child psychologist on Common Core in YouTube. And she articulates it really well about what the problem is. I retell the story. It would be like having a standard that all children should walk at 6 months. First of all, we know that that is not reasonable. Many children would be harmed because their bone structure and muscle structure is not developed to the point where, so if you made them do it, it could damage their bone structure for the rest of their life. This is how damaging. So I only say the Common Core standards are not good. This group of people says they are harmful. They will teach children will develop math phobia by the end of kindergarten. It's extreme, so very worrisome both in the early childhood and the pressure it puts on 4-year-old preschool. Kids are in that, right? And the children with disabilities. Oh yeah, religion. So there is nothing explicit in the math and English language arts standards about religion, other than you see in some of the reading exemplars the point you made about there's maybe a paragraph on Christianity and 10 pages on the Quran. I mean, this imbalance in terms of the way it's delivered. The Next Generation Science Standards, NGSS, the Michigan Department of Ed and the Board of Education was fixing to approve in March for Michigan, but there were about 12 parents that showed up to a state board meeting, which is attended by nobody. So they took it off the agenda and have not approved it, and we hope we won't. But I encourage you to check that out because they are celebrating the fact that all references to God or supreme being or creationism or any other references to God are taken out of the science standards. And finally, K-12 children will learn that global warming is caused by human activity, and we know this by scientific consensus. So they're going to teach kids things that are not true based on a non-scientific process in our national science standards. Seriously.
Okay, I don't really have a question. I just wanted to touch on the English literature.
Common Core has a list of books for our students to read, and it's very important that you take a look at what our children are reading. My granddaughter went to Reese Puffer. She came home and she showed me a couple pages out of one of the books that's on Common Core's list, and it's called The Bluest Eye. And I was appalled and shocked. It is porn. It's pornographic. The description of stuff that was going on was so explicit. I couldn't even believe it. So me and my son went to the principal. The principal said it was not porn. I went to the superintendent. The superintendent said it was not porn. So I went through the process to try and get that removed